colored, so it acts as camouflage when they're sitting on the nest incubating the eggs. They have no beard and no spurs. For those that don't know what a beard is, it's a specialized feather that comes out of a turkey's chest. Typically, hens don't have that. However, up to some localized populations, up to about 10% will have a beard. You do see them on a fairly regular basis if you look at enough turkeys. Spurs. Hens typically don't have spurs. It's very rare that a hen will have spurs. And a spur is a bony protrusion that sticks out of a turkey's leg. And their foot length, they're smaller in size. They're 4.5 inches to 5 inches long. And the droppings are compressed and compacted. So you don't even have to see the bird that went by. You can just look at the droppings and you can tell that's a female or a male. Now this is an adult male. They range from 16 to 25 pounds. Their breast feathers are black tipped. They're iridescent in color. They don't have feathering on the top of the head. The beard is present in an adult male. Usually the beard is longer than 6 inches. And the spurs are usually longer than about a ½ inch. And some of them get over an inch on the older birds. The spur grows throughout a turkey's life, and the older it gets, the longer the spur gets. However, in New England, we have so many rocks that sometimes those spurs do wear down. So there was one study in New Jersey that I know of. A bird was caught, banded, they knew the bird, and then it was shot like 2 years later, and the spur was actually shorter. It had worn it down going across rugged terrain. The droppings on a male turkey are about 1.5 inches long, and they're J-shaped. A juvenile bird, also called a jake, and this is during the spring. They're typically about 12 to 17 pounds. Like the adults, they're iridescent. The beards are less than 6 inches long, and the spur is nothing but a nub. In this picture here, that's the beard, and that's the spur right there. I should have pointed that out on the line. Here's the beard here, and that's the spur right there, right here. Turkeys do have predators. Great horned owls will feed on turkeys. When a turkey becomes an adult, it's rare that something predates on it. Turkeys have excellent eyesight, excellent hearing, and can react to danger like that. It's amazing how quickly they can react. But they do get caught by predators once in a while. Fisher is another animal that will predate on turkeys. Raccoons, mainly on young turkeys and the eggs. If they find a turkey nest, they will eat the eggs. Coyotes. Coyotes are probably the #1 predator on turkeys. Bobcats. Bobcats are more prevalent in Connecticut than many people realize. They are out there, and when I'm flying aerial deer surveys, I do them on a regular basis. And they will also feed on turkeys. Now, do you want me to take out here and give you some turkey vocalizations, or do you want to wait until the end?
Could you turn on the lights when you do it?
Sure.
Please.
It's better hearing.
a couple of different turkey calls. This is known as a slate call or a pot call and a peg. This is a box call. And then this is a diaphragm call. Okay, so it's a spring morning. The sun is just coming up over the horizon. The turkeys are up in the trees. They roost in the trees at night. The hens are beginning to communicate with one another. So the first sound they make in the morning is called a tree call, which is a real low, subtle yelp. So you have one in that tree, another one over here. So they're ready to fly out of the trees. When they do that, they do what's known as a fly-down cackle. Take some of the water. So they may give a little yelp to just let each other know where they are. But know each other, they're going to come out of the trees now. So then they're on the ground and they're talking with each other. So now they're getting aggravated with one another. They're going to be fighting over that gobbler. So they do what's known as cutting. So that's cutting. Saved it to the last thing. It's all downhill from here.
So will they, could you use those for calling them, attracting them?
Yes. That's what I use them for. Okay, now we're back in the springtime. The turkeys are on the ground and it's mating season. This is an adult gobbler strutting his stuff, trying to attract females. During the spring, mating begins at about mid-March, and it's a polygamous mating system. It's one male will mate many females. Once mating occurs, the hens go off, they find a secluded area to nest. Gobblers go looking for other mates. The gobbler has no parental involvement whatsoever. The hen raises the young. The nest of a turkey is nothing really more than a depression in the ground. Once the hen is mated, it will go out and find a nest bowl site. Usually it's in a brush pile or in a tree or near a base of the tree. They nest on the ground. They lay 8 to 12 eggs, and they lay 1 egg a day. So it takes 12 days to lay the clutch of eggs. Once the final egg is laid, it takes 28 days of incubation. So some of those eggs could be as much as 11 or 12 days old, and yet all the poults hatch out at the same time, which is pretty amazing. This is an example of a poult. This bird is probably about 10 days old, and that's an important milestone in a turkey's life. At 10 days, the turkey has the ability to fly. So what that means, it can get off the ground and get up into the trees at night, which makes them less vulnerable to predation. Insects are very important in the turkey's diet, particularly during the first month of life. Wild turkeys feed almost exclusively on insects during this period of time. And the reason being is the insects provide the protein for the turkey to grow its feathers, develop its muscles, and it's putting on a lot of weight. And the insects are the ones that provide that food resource and that protein resource to go through that rapid period of development. Some of the other soft mass that turkeys will utilize during the late spring, early summer period, there's a variety of 4 different types of dogwoods, the flowering dogwood, the red osier dogwood, silky dogwood, elderberry is another one, wild grapes, cranberry, and hawthorn. All these produce a berry that they will utilize. They'll also eat blueberries, dewberries, strawberries. Once again, there's a wide variety of different food items that turkeys will utilize. In the fall period, the hens with their broods will come together, and sometimes there'll be some males in that group too, but usually the males are separate and the females are with their young during this period of time. The fall is a time of plenty for turkeys. There's a lot of different foods out there. For example, the hard mass, we have a number of different species of white oak, and they feed on the acorns, shagbark hickory, mockernut hickory, bitternut hickory. Those are all food sources that turkeys utilize. You got red oaks, pin oaks, black oak, and the American beech. And all are foods that are available to them. And they spend a lot of time on bridges if acorns are abundant. If they're not abundant, then they'll be out in the fields looking for whatever seeds they can find, especially the cornfields. The winter is a little bit more difficult on turkeys, especially if it's thick, fluffy snow. Thick, fluffy snow, they have a hard time getting around. But fortunately, we don't have these conditions too often. Every once in a while, usually you'll have maybe a day or so, then you'll get a melt, and it will freeze, and you get a crust on top. And that allows the turkeys to go out and find other food resources. Corn being an example. Not so much now, but years ago, a lot of farmers used to have manure spreaders. And they would take that and spread the manure out on the fields, and the turkeys would go and pick through that manure and pick out any waste grains that were left. One of the biologists, Brian Miller, he coined that as the hot lunch program. Winterberry holly is another food source that persists above the snow line that turkeys will utilize. Spring seeps are areas where the water table is close to the surface of the ground and snow doesn't accumulate as much, and turkeys will go in and feed on tubers and worms and a variety of different those areas. They're able to get through the snow easy enough to find these things. And the ground is still moist, so a lot of these food items will still be available to them. Do not feed the turkeys. I'm going to get up on my soapbox here for a minute. There's enough food in Connecticut's woodlands that it's not necessary to feed turkeys. And one of the things that it's not good to feed the turkeys is because when you bring these birds into close proximity of one another for extended periods of time, it enhances the chance that disease can be passed from one bird to the other. So that's one. The other reason The birds sometimes become habituated to people. And I think over time, if turkeys are fed by people, they no longer perceive people as people, they think it's another turkey. And I do get probably about a dozen complaints every year where turkeys are getting aggressive towards people. And it's not a good situation.
Just for the first year, I have a gang of 3, we call them, they're males with the beard. They come, I'm not intending to feed them, but I have one bird feeder outside, with, sunflower seeds and other mix. They come and stand right under the bird feeder and pick what drops.
Yeah.
I'm like,
One of the ways, I mean, if it becomes a real problem, 3 birds is not too bad. And if you're not going out there and feeding them out of your hand,
no.
some of these people take it to extremes, and they're out there
It's
making
just
pets out of wild turkeys, and that's what I don't like to see.
But we're surrounded by woods, I'm surprised, they have plenty of food.
They're opportunistic. It's easy for them, that's exactly right. Why go out and scratch around for acorns if they know that they can come there and get sunflower seeds and corn?
This is the first year, so it's never happened before.
On that situation, if it gets to be a problem and you get more and more turkeys, you can still feed the birds. And what I tell people is take woven wire and put it around your bird feeder with a 6-inch mesh. The small birds can get through that woven wire, but the turkeys won't be able to get to the food source.
Well, they don't get to the feeder, they're eating only what's
I know,
falling on
but
the ground.
if you put the wire around the feeder
Yeah.
in a big circle,
Yeah.
so it excludes the turkeys from getting in there. And if the mesh is, 6 by 6, the small birds can get to it. And if the circle is, say, 3 feet, probably more than that, 4 feet around, then the turkeys won't be able to get to the food source.
All the way to the ground, you're saying?
Yes.
Oh, all the way to the ground.
Yeah, but that can,
I was gonna say.
Well, I mean, if you got a 4-foot, say, usually the fencing is about 4 feet high.
yeah.
Yeah, they can fly, but they're probably not going to do it, especially if it's just a 4-foot radius.
But could they stand on it though? Like,
Oh, sure.
stand on the mesh so they can go around to the feeder?
Can hop over.
Well, I mean, they could, but they're probably not going to go through that much effort. That's true. I'm going to go through some of the research that we've conducted over the years. The first thing is a sighting card. We started that sighting card program, and what it was a chance for the biologists to get information from the general public about Connecticut's wild turkey resource. We started this in probably the early 80s, when turkeys were still pretty much novelty in the state of Connecticut. And it worked well for Brian Miller, once again, was one of the key individuals that utilized this technique. We utilized this technique through 1980s into the early 1990s, but as the population grew and expanded and turkeys were no longer a novelty, the utility of this research kind of dropped off. But in the early days, it did allow us to get information on turkey productivity, population and range expansion. We got information because we were asking what the size of the poults were, about hatch dates, and just general population. We were actually developing population estimates off of the sighting cards, and it did work real well. We also conducted in the 80s gobble counts. And the reason that we did this, we wanted to know when the peak in gobbling occurred. And this gives you insight as to when peak mating is going on. Typically, your gobbling begins in the mid-March, and it increases, and the first peak is in April. And that's where many of the hens are bred during that period of time. Then they go off and nest, and after that, the gobbler increase their gobbling, and you get a second peak about the last week of April. That's where another bunch of females are mated, and after that, almost all the females are mated at that point in time. And when you want to time a hunting season when most of the females are on the nest. And that was why they did this kind of activity, looking at gobbling. And that was why we set our spring season the first Wednesday in May. We've since changed it a little bit, but that was the reason. So you hit that right after the second peak. So the hunting season was coming in right here. So almost all the hens were on the nest, or a good majority of them. Because you don't want to impact the population, yet you want the hunters to be able to hear the gobbling activity. We also did a radio telemetry study, and it was a cooperative study. We had a grad student from the University of Maine doing it. We were trapping turkeys, and we were putting devices on their back. These are little backpack transmitters, and then you would go out and use the antenna and find a bird from one location, go to another location, find it again, and then triangulate. And where those points met on the map, that's where that bird was. What we were doing is looking at survival, we were looking at movements, we were looking at home range. The survival during the first year, 50% of our collared or telemetry birds died, which was pretty significant. Many of the other studies indicated that was a high mortality. The second year, 28% of those birds died as well. The ones that survived, 28% of those died as well.
Do you mean died or hunted?
Died. By a lot of, and I'll get into why they died. 81% of hens nested during that year, and we just had telemetry devices on hens, no males. This was all females. 36% of the nests were successful, pulling off at least one pull out of the nest. And the average nest size was 11 eggs. And during the day, another thing we looked at is how long the hens were going off the nest in a 24-hour period. And typically we found that they would be off the nest for about 2 hours. They go out, feed, recharge, and then get back on the nest. The mortality that we found for these birds, 52% we attributed to mammalian predation, raccoons, coyotes, bobcats. Those were the prime candidates for the predation by mammals. Avian predation, hawks, disease took 6%, and poaching took 6%, illegal hunting, and vehicles took 6%. So mammalian predation was by far the biggest factor with predation on turkey populations. Home ranges. The average home range for a turkey was 4.2 square miles, and the range of home ranges was 1.2 to 7.3 square miles. So they can have some pretty good sized home ranges. The core areas, these are turkeys here. This is one bird, this is another bird. Their core areas, this is where they spent 50% of the time. The red is the summer core area, and the darker ring is the winter core area, and then this is their overall home range. And typically we would find that the winter home ranges would coincide with some kind of farming operation, because they would be feeding on the waste grains during that period of time. Also conduct a brood index. This is information that I get from our wildlife biologists, conservation officers, and the general public. And what I'm trying to get a handle on is annual productivity. And the brood index is basically the number of poults per hen. In 2006, they started this and it was 1.7, which is dismal. You really can't keep a population going at one hen producing less than 2 poults. It got a little bit better in 2007. 2008 was a little worse. 2009 was pretty bad once again. One of the biggest factors with productivity is spring weather. When you have cold, wet springs, the birds don't do well, and there's 2 reasons for that. In a cold, wet spring, when a hen is on the nest, if you have 3 days and they don't get a chance to dry off their feathers, then they emit more of an odor, and predators are able to key in on them and take them right off the nest. The other thing that happens is when you have cold weather after the poults have hatched out, cold, wet weather, if the poults don't get a chance to dry off their feathers, then they succumb to like a pneumonia condition and they die because of that. So the spring weather is paramount. That's probably the biggest factor with wild turkey populations. Now in 2010 we had really good productivity and that really helped bolster the population. But on that graph of the population, at one point it was up around 40,000 birds. That was 2003, 2004. Since then, we've kind of had a little bit of decline, and we've been oscillating somewhere around 32 to 35,000 birds. And I still think we're in that realm right now. Last year was not too bad, and this past spring was so-so.
How do you get that number?
I add up all the young birds that everybody sees across the entire state. Then I add up how many hens everybody sees and divides the poults by the number of hens, and that's the index.
Is there a limiting factor that's causing that decline?
It's the weather. The weather is the primary factor.
Are you saying that then, when you say brood, you don't mean number of broods, you mean?
I mean actual young.
Little baby. 2.5? You see many. A
Well,
mother with many.
yeah, but you also see a lot of hens that don't have any. And when you factor it all in, that's what happens. And it's just an index, but it does give you insight at what's going on with your population.
Why do the little babies die from pneumonia and the other big ones don't, but they're really the same thing but bigger?
Because the bigger birds are bigger body and they have more weight and they can absorb more water and they actually can repel it a lot better. It's kind of like a baby, a human baby, susceptible to colds and things, whereas an adult isn't. And it's the same thing in the turkey world. We do have hunting seasons on the wild turkeys in Canada. We have a spring season, we have a fall firearm season, and a fall archery season. Our spring season starts the last Wednesday in May, or the last Wednesday in April, and runs through the last Saturday in May. The bag limit is 3 birds on private land and 2 birds on state land. And the hours for the spring season are a half hour before sunrise to noon. And the reason that we close it at noon is it allows the hens to get off the nest and they're not harassed by anybody, and the farmers can get out into their fields, and other users of Connecticut woodlands can get out there and not have any hunting going on. Equipment, both bow and arrow and shotguns can be used for wild turkey hunting. A little bit of history here. The first season in Connecticut was in 1981, and that first season was restricted just to northwest Connecticut. We felt we had enough population at that point to have some hunting that goes on. And that particular season, 428 permits were issued and 21 birds were harvested. Turkeys are a difficult bird to hunt. They're very wary, they have excellent eyesight, excellent hearing, and as I said before, they can react to danger very quickly. Records, the highest permit issuance for a spring season was this past spring at 8,615 permits, and the highest harvest we ever had during the spring season was in 2003 at 2,367 birds. This kind of illustrates where our turkey populations are in the state of Connecticut. Slide kind of got cut off, but the dark blue was the highest harvest towns. This is Lebanon, Connecticut, and Woodstock, Connecticut. And in 2011, there were 44 birds harvested in each of those towns. If there's no color, there were no birds harvested in those towns. Pink is 1 to 10, green is 11 to 20, and the light blue is 21 to 30. Darkest blue, once again, that was 44 birds, and it just was coincidental that that year both those towns killed 44 birds. So we have pretty good turkey populations throughout the state. It's kind of shifted. 15 years ago, we had a lot more turkeys in the northwest corner and not as many in the northeast. And now we've really got probably more turkeys in the northeast than we do in the northwest. We also do have a fall archery season. It coincides with our deer season, which essentially is September 15th through December 31st. Arrow is legal. The bag limit is 2 birds, and they can be harvested either on private land or on state land. And the hunting hours are half hour before sunrise to sunset, and the equipment is bow and arrow. The fall, some of the history on archery. The first season was in '83. 434 permits were issued. 2 birds were It's not easy. What turkeys pick up on is movement. And when you're shooting a bow and arrow, you have to draw the arrow. And turkeys will pick up on that, and they're going to the next hillside if they see that. Records, permit issuance was highest in 2002, 2,706 permits, and the highest harvest that we've had is 73 birds, and that was in 2001. Fall firearms, you can harvest 2 birds on private land, 1 bird on state land. Hunting hours are a half hour before sunrise to sunset, and the season runs from the first Saturday in October through the last day in October.
There's 2 birds per year, is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. And the first season was in 1990. 579 permits were issued that year, and 52 birds were harvested. Records were in 2002. There were 3,981 permits issued, and the highest harvest was in 1999 at 290 birds harvested. At this point, I will open it up to any questions.
Are they good eating?
They're so lean.
They're very good. I mean,
Someone said they were tough, I don't know.
Slow cooking is the method. 4 to 6 hours, I was told.
I do harvest a bird every once in a while. They are excellent eating. They don't have as much fat as the domestic birds, so you do have to be careful when you're cooking them. They do tend to dry out if you don't have something that will keep the juices in. One of my favorite recipes is sweet and sour sauce. It's just apricot jam, wishbone Russian dressing, and Lipton onion soup. Just put that in a crock pot and let it go for 3 or 4 hours.
There we go.
and it's excellent.
Wow. I have 3 questions. One, how long do turkeys live?
Till they die.
Well, that isn't what I'm saying.
Typically, a bird that is 3 or 4 years old that's a pretty old bird. They don't typically live too much longer than that.
Okay. The second question is, when you said that the chicks live on the ground until they're 10 days old and they're able to fly, does the mother stay on the ground with them at night, or does
Yes.
she go up into the tree?
She usually will stay with them, put her wings out.
And to protect them.
That offspring.
The third question is, I saw a program on PBS on turkeys. I don't know whether you saw it, where a band lived in the woods during the summer, and a whole flock of baby turkeys followed him all around. And he must have represented the mother figure to them, because you said they stay with their mother,
They
right?
will imprint very well. One of the individuals, and I actually have known him for a number of years, a guy named Bill Healy, he was, I believe, the first individual that did that. And he's a biologist, and he raised these poults, and he studied what they would eat. He studied all aspects of wild turkey life through these.
There's a DVD out about Bill Haley, My Life as a Turkey.
Yes, that's
That's
it.
the
And I
one.
didn't
It's a
turn it
riot.
at the beginning.
It's
But
a
the-
riot.
He's an interesting
Yeah.
individual.
But the question I have to ask about that is, as the summer went on, these turkeys would just separate from him as they got older. And at the end, you see him sitting under the tree, and this one male turkey was left and actually attacked him viciously. And he said that at that point, that man was a threat to that turkey for some reason, even though he was following him of his own free will. And so I was laughing and thought about it, and I thought, now, if that fellow, between turkeys, it would be male against male when they are breeding. Is that true, or mating?
Absolutely.
And now, did that turkey know that this fellow was a man? And, why would he attack him like that? And then the fellow, Bill Haley, said that he was a threat to that one turkey that was left. And the turkey could have just walked away from him at the end. He wasn't forced to stay there.
If a young bird is trying to establish the territory,
Yeah.
there's a chance that he doesn't want anybody there, and that's probably
And that was the
why.
reason. I mean, he went after him with his spurs and everything, really.
And it's interesting, I spoke about nuisance turkeys or turkeys that are aggressive towards people. I've been out on calls where people can walk right up to the birds, and they don't even run or anything.
Really?
I get out there, I can't even get close to them. So they have the ability, and I don't know how they do it, but they can recognize somehow that
The
I'm a
person
threat.
is a danger to them.
And I don't know if it's body posture, because I'm trying to catch the bird and get it out of the
Something about your
area,
energy.
or what, but they do have that ability.
We had a cat once who basically ignored turkeys, and he was after a mouse or something, or he had just killed one of the turkeys, made their appearance in the yard, and he wanted the mouse back, and he crept up to it, and he was getting really close to the turkeys, and I was ready just to move and startle the turkeys, and our cat probably got within 3 feet of one hen, and the hen didn't even bother him, which surprised me.
Didn't take it as a threat.
You mentioned the jakes with iridescent feathers. Are they the only ones that have iridescent feathers?
The adult males do as well.
Okay.
Yeah, the plumage is quite different from male and female. Males have this brilliant plumage, just gorgeous iridescent. You can see here how much of a shine there is on that. Typically, the females will have feathering right to the tip of the head, and the males don't have that. And a lot of it stems from them sitting, the female sitting on the nest for 28 days. That little bit of camouflage increases their survival.
And I wanted to ask about the, I just forgot. I forgot, sorry. Is there any evidence of turkeys doing better in developed areas rather than old-stand forests when development occurs?
Not to my knowledge. I know that they do very well in developed areas, and there's no reason why they shouldn't. They have everything they need there. They have water, and they've got plenty of food. But as far as them doing, the population's doing that much better, that's really nothing that I've seen anybody look at. So it will be an interesting research project.
Right, well, I know they've done it with like deer populations and other wildlife.
Another question about aggressive turkeys. I don't know if you read it, but maybe 2-3 weeks ago in the Hartford Courant, there was an article about turkeys attacking a car. I think it was a music teacher in a private school downstate. And he, I guess he told his students, and they didn't believe it. The next day, the same thing happened, and he took a video with his camera or something and showed it to them. And they all it went viral on the internet, I guess. And then, they called him the turkey whisperer or something.
I got interviewed by Channel 30 on that.
Do you have a take on why they were attacking?
Well, I think what happened there is, a lot of times, if it's a highly polished car,
Yep.
you can see their reflection.
Yep.
You see that windows too sometimes. That's what's going on there.
I saw a turkey twice in front of a car, shiny bumper, going back and forth for 20 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they do just the dumbest things. I was trapping turkeys back a few years ago. We would run a cord from our blind to the rockets, and that's how we would fire the rockets. We would shoot a charge down that cord. And if the cord was on the ground and it was in plain view, many times the turkey wouldn't walk over the cord. And whether they thought it was a snake or what, I don't know. But that was just one of the weird things that the turkeys did. Now, if you put it up in a fence and wound it down a barbed wire fence, they would walk right under it, but they wouldn't walk over it.
Sometimes it's a perception.
Strange birds.
Now, when they do that, you think of the lines in the road, because I've driven, and they'd be right in the middle of the road, just sitting there, waiting. They come up to them, stop, but a few times.
And a lot of times, if you're hunting turkeys, it's very difficult to call them across any kind of body of water, streams, rivers, anything. And it doesn't have to be much. It can just be a small brook, and it's difficult for you to get them across.
Why will they swim? Out of necessity or?
They don't like to swim. They just do have the ability to do that, and it is out of necessity. I don't know what kind of scenario you might have where they would swim, but they do. I just thought it was an interesting fact and something that you could introduce the turkey with.
And do they do it with their wings like an eagle does, or?
It's more with their feet. It's the pictures that I've never actually seen one swim.
I know the Native Americans used their feathers quite often, and so were they revered? The turkeys revered by them, or did they use them for some other reason? Were they considered
Oh, I think they were a food source for them. Yeah.
more so than? Okay.
They
Well,
also called it the peace eagle. Native Americans called the turkey the peace eagle.
good. I'm not familiar. The other thing that the Native Americans did do is they used to wing by turkey calls.
One final thought, the difference between a turkey wild turkey and domesticated turkey that grow on these big turkey farms? Are they like different species or what?
In the same species, yet it's just genetic engineering, so to speak.
Yeah,
Over
just-
time and successive generations, the turkeys have evolved to, or the farmers have created these birds that will put on a lot of weight and are much different.
These birds are so alert and smart and resourceful, and the farm turkeys are pretty dumb.
And that's one of the reasons that, I talked about the 740 birds that were released and never produced a viable population. One of the reasons that occurred is the wild turkey is high strung, and if you try to put them in any kind of fenced-in area, they don't do well at all. They're literally bouncing off the walls. And I think what happened over time is you still had genetic wild strain turkeys, but those real high aggressive, high energy birds, they would die out. So you would have the more mellow birds that were left. Even though the genetics were there, the not really the aggressiveness, but the survival instincts to react to danger were bred out of the birds. And when you released them back into the wild, they didn't know a coyote was going to eat them, or they didn't have the ability to get out of its way fast enough. And I think that's why those early releases never amounted to much. And then when we went out and started capturing truly wild birds with the rocket nets, then we were able to establish populations.
What do you think the optimal turkey population in Connecticut would be?
I don't have an answer for you on that. I think there's room for growth. There's still habitats out there that we don't have a lot of turkeys in. I don't have an answer. I think the birds, I think there's still habitat out there that the birds can move into. One of the things that we see, and nobody's quite sure why, is about 25 years after initial releases of turkeys in a given state, the population begins to decline a little bit or level out. And that's where we are, about more than 30 years after our initial releases. But we're kind of oscillating around that, I think, 35,000 birds statewide. And why that is, I'm not sure. There may be some density dependency going on where you just, because of aggressive natures of turkeys and turkey home ranges, you may not have allow any more birds in that area. And that's something that we are discussing. Every year I go meet with turkey biologists from across the Northeast, and that is something discussed quite often. Why we have that kind of leveling out.
I once read that years ago, it had to have been in the 1800s, they used to raise turkeys in, Vermont and Maine, New Hampshire. They used to drive them down. They used to walk them down to Boston to sell them.
Is that right?
Hundreds and hundreds of turkeys. Yeah.
Turkey drive.
Yeah.
Good way to do it.
That's right.
10 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Several years ago, I heard a vicious rumor that the state reintroduced the Fisher cat to control the turkey population. What do you think about that?
There's no truth to that.
Yeah, I think so.
Here's what happened with the fishers. It was a species that was a native species in the state of Connecticut that had disappeared from the state. So in the late 80s, Paul Rigo decided to reintroduce the fisher to Connecticut. And the fishers came to Connecticut through a convoluted trade. We traded turkeys with another state. I think it was Maine. And then Maine traded something with New Hampshire, and New Hampshire gave us fisher. There were a handful of fisher that were released in northwest Connecticut. And the fisher all had collars on them, and There was a telemetry study going on. While these populations were being established, Fisher began moving in from Massachusetts down in eastern Connecticut, northeast Connecticut. So we had
Bird flu wouldn't affect the turkey.
avian bird flu is another thing, West Nile. They don't seem to succumb to West Nile though. They can be carriers of it, but crows and blue jays are a big group that succumb to West Nile.
How are they in the agricultural community? Are they difficult for the farmers, or is that?
For the most part, no.
They don't eat seeds in the ground or that type of thing?
There's sometimes they will, but it's pretty rare that there are any kind of agricultural damage. Matter of fact, we had Haight Vineyard up in Litchfield. Mr. Haight was convinced that the turkeys were eating all his grapes. And the National Wild Turkey Federation had just done a lot of research out in California and in the Finger Lakes region of New York. They found that it wasn't the turkeys. It was raccoons, it was deer, foxes. But Mr. Hay was convinced it was turkeys. I said, all right. So I got a hold of one of the guys from NWTF. We got some trail cameras and we put them in the vineyards. We never got a picture of a turkey eating a grape. I had pictures of deer with their heads right in the grapes.
His wine is bad to begin with.
For the most part, they're more beneficial. They're eating all kinds of insects that could harm the grapes. And after seeing all the pictures and talking with them, he agreed with me. And that was a good research project and had a nice ending.
Yeah, his wine is bad.
Yeah, why would the turkeys want the grapes anyway?
They are gourmets.
Roosting, they tend to roost in groups.
Yep.
And they'll use that roost for just one season, or will they use it continually year after year? Or?
They'll use it year after year. Sometimes they do change roosts. You know, I said that they have on average a 4.2 mile home range. So there's probably several different roosts in a given area that they will utilize. And they do use the same roost here. I was up in Maine this past spring, and there was winter roosts up there in big white pines, and in talking with the individual that I was hunting with up there, he said that turkeys during the winter have used this 3 or 4 trees for years. And underneath the trees, it was ringed with droppings and feathers. That's where they had spent so much time.
On Nippon, one time we found a roost with just thousands of feathers.
And one of the things turkeys like to do, turkeys are kind of lazy, and for them to fly directly up into a tree requires a lot of energy. So a lot of times what they'll do is, say you got a pine tree here, and you got a ridge that goes up like this. They'll walk up the ridge, and they're ready to go to roost. They just set their wings and jump into the tree. So, they're not dumb birds. No, a roost is just a tree. And at night, and it's usually a big oak or a big white pine, they like a roost tree. Typically is a big tree that has limbs on it that they can really get their feet on.
And can you disturb a turkey at night? I mean, they got their eyes closed and they're really, I mean, can you just go, if you could do it without light, could you grab one? I just was wondering, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never tried it. Usually roosts are 20 or 30 feet up in the tree. I would guess that you probably could. Yeah. I would guess that they would wake up and
How's the easiest way to get the feathers off of them? How do you do it?
I don't pluck them. Yeah. I have plucked turkeys and it's a lot of work. They're not as bad as geese, but turkeys, it's quite a bit of work. People say that you dunk them in boiling water and then pull them out and the feathers typically fall off. I haven't done that, so I don't know.
When the chicken, I heard you the same way.
Yeah.
Because we raise chickens and that's what you do, boil them.
Yeah.
They're easy to pull.
Do any other states have these kind of programs to increase the population around in New England?
The releases?
Yeah, or try catching them and putting them somewhere else.
Yeah. There was a big push, and NWTF was National Wild Turkey Federation, is a nonprofit that worked in cooperation with the state. And it was a program called Project 2000. And the whole program was to reintroduce turkeys in suitable habitat across the country. At this point in time, it's pretty much done. We have turkeys in habitats that they weren't even native to, but the population overall are doing pretty well throughout the country. There's 5 different subspecies of turkeys too. We have the eastern subspecies. There's an Osceola that is down in Florida. There's a Miriam subspecies, which is more bird out in Wyoming and Montana and South Dakota. And then you get the Rio Grande. Those are the different subspecies, and each subspecies is a little bit different.
What kind do we have?
We have the eastern.
Well, I think we'll call the questions now. I think Mike will be around a little while afterwards, and we can all talk to him as well. I would like to give you our Hartland Plan Trust decal as a little gift from us. It works really well in notebooks and that kind of thing. And we'd really like to thank you for coming out here. It was a great presentation.